Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live event, Connecting the Medical Sector, HL7 Edition. Yeah, I'm happy to have you all here in our session. I will share my screen and give you a short introduction into our event. My name is Peter Nix, and I'm Head of Medical Solutions at Softgate. Yeah, I would like to introduce you Softgate for a short moment. So we are a software company, and yeah, as the name Softgate, let's suspect you, we develop software. We do develop software mainly for medical systems, so we cover the complete range from controlling devices with embedded and real-time software over image acquisition and image processing. We care for data handling, that means patient data, physiological data, or institutional data that comes up during examining patients, for example. Of course, we develop user interfaces in order to interact with the medical system until the connectivity and interoperability of systems, in order to connect them to the medical infrastructure, what will be the main focus of our today's session. Softgate celebrates its 30th anniversary this year, and we do medical software since its beginning. I know this because I'm part of the team since 1992. Softgate is located in Erlangen. It is a region called Medical Valley. It is named this because there are not only nice hospitals and a lot of doctors, but there are a lot of companies developing medical devices. I think one of the best known is Siemens Healthineers. However, of course, there are many more. There are a lot of companies that do software development like Softgate. And there are also a lot of research projects running because we have universities in Erlangen and Nuremberg and, for example, the Fraunhofer Institute here in this region. Yeah, our customers, who they are. Let's get to the standards. So if you want to connect between medical systems, you need a standard, or you do it best based on a standard. But there is no typical standard that can always be used. And like the world of standards, we do not have the typical customer. Who may be our customers or our users? Most of them develop a medical system that needs to be connected to the medical infrastructure. So this may be medical devices like endoscopes, radiography systems, IT systems like doctors' management systems that work in hospitals or in doctors' practices, or they do simply research projects. So they do not have a medical system ready, but they want to care for connectivity from the start on. And there we can do for this team a lot of things too. But what do all of them have in common? The focus of our potential users lies on the medical purpose. So they have a device that has a medical purpose. Connectivity is a necessary burden they have to fulfill. And our goal is to help to connect the system as smart as possible by using the appropriate standard and the state-of-the-art software. What is our solution and what do we offer to you? Yeah, one thing is consulting. We help to understand the requirements in order to integrate correctly into the medical workflow and to select the correct standard for communication. Then we may provide an individual software or a product that can be easily used at the medical device. And of course, we help to fulfill the documentation requirements according risk management, requirement engineering, testing, all the stuff that is required for a medical system. Finally, we support our customers doing the first steps in integration into a clinical environment. So we do the complete circle from start of development, consulting, until getting the system in the hospital run. So that was just a quick overview about Softgate, but now let's come to our today's session. I would like to introduce the agenda in a shortcut. So at first, we will have Markus, who will take us on a journey into the jungle of medical communication standards. Then Nico will tell how we got the idea of connectivity solutions at Softgate. Then Stasis from our partner company Meg & More will give us a view on integrating a system into the medical communication from the point of a device manufacturer. And finally, what will be one of the main focuses, will introduce our brand new product HL7 Connect. Whenever you have questions, there is a chat functionality where you can enter your questions, and after each slot we will take short time to answer the questions, and in the end, of course, we will have a session for your questions too. If anything will be open at the end, of course, you can contact us directly via LinkedIn, mail, or phone. You may visit us in Erlangen. It is a very nice region here. And we are present as exhibitors on the fairs Medica in Düsseldorf, DMEA in Berlin, and MedTech Live in Nuremberg. So you see there are a lot of contact possibilities, and you can reach us when you want. Before we start, I would like to ask you kindly for taking part at our survey after this session. You will find a link in the chat, and it will be very helpful for us to get your feedback on the session. You see, this is the HL7 edition, and we plan some additional sessions later, but we will improve, or we would like to improve our performance, and there your feedback is very helpful for us. So now I hand over to Markus for our first slot. Yeah, and I say, welcome to the jungle.
So, thank you very much, Peter, for this brief introduction. Yeah, I have two slots today. The first one is about healthcare communication standards in general. And the second one is going to be more specific about specific challenges in HL7 and how we solve them in our product. My name is Markus Sabin. I've been with Softgate since 2014. I'm working in a team which we call medical connectivity. And our claim is to support our customers in the way that they could use it best. So some of them want to learn and do the project on their own. These are consultancy customers, and the others need software in any way, so we could develop something for them, or we would provide our products to them. That very much depends on what the customer needs and expects, and how much of the expertise he wants to have in his own company, and how much he wants to get away from all that. So this presentation is a little bit driven by the early stages of a connectivity consulting project, and our typical customer is, well, what we are seeing when we are consulting healthcare manufacturers is that there is a tremendous amount of innovation there. I've seen so many super impressive devices, and I'm really excited about seeing cutting edge technology. But some of our customers are running into the situation that when they present it to their prospective buyers in the hospitals, and their device is really great, and no one doubts that, but medical documentation sharing, cross-enterprise document sharing, having the patient involved in his treatment is a growing demand, also a purchasing criterion. And very often they come from such a discussion, with is a bit abbreviated here in this presentation. They come with their great device and they come back a little bit frustrated because the doctors, yes, they looked at their device, they said it is great, but they cannot buy it because it doesn't integrate. And the term that is very often mentioned then is the electronic medical record. And that's the first beast that we are going to meet on this journey into our jungle. The electronic medical record is actually, in my opinion, more a concept than really a product. There are, of course, many products which claim to be an EMR, but this definition, what it is and what it is not, is quite fuzzy. We can think of it as a concept where all the patient data that occurs, whether it is in the hospital or outside the hospital or transferred from a different hospital, is collected to present it in a uniform way to all the users which are interested and entitled to see this information. Very often, the electronic medical record shares its work, but I'm not talking about products here. I'm talking about concepts. You may find products that are enclosing many of the functionalities that I'm describing here. I'm more describing it on a functional level. So think of the electronic medical record as a system that knows which documents exist and knows in which way to present them to the user. It does not necessarily have to have them all. Also very known is the hospital information system. The focus of the hospital information system is, I would say, more the organizational part. The EMR is keeping track of documentation that occurs. The hospital information system is more about planning resources, knowing which patient is in which bed, knowing the resources that are available, the devices, the departments, the appointments, and of course, billing and invoicing relevant stuff. These systems are, well, organizational systems. There are two more systems or concepts that are capable of swallowing big data, big documents. The hospital information system and the EMR is more like a database application. Document archive and PACS, picture archiving and communication system, is more an information sink which is optimized for handling big amounts of data. And all these four systems collaborate towards the user to give him a uniform way of doing his work. Planning, scheduling, conducting, and documenting. Now, for a long time of my career, I thought this is the topmost of the systems until I met guys from a very, very big institution, a company running more than 50 hospitals in Germany. And these were the IT guys that we had to talk to. And when I looked into their business card, I was really, really wondering why their job title was head of medical subsystems. I mean, if this is the subsystem, what is the super system then? That was the question that I asked them, and they told me, well, the super system is SAP, or more commonly, an enterprise resource planning system. You will never get in touch with that unless you are a hospital information system manufacturer, but I'm just mentioning this for painting the whole picture. So the ERP system is the system which carries the patient master records and the billing data, and has, of course, a close connection with the hospital information system. The more interesting part, I guess, for most of the participants of this session, is what happens to a clinical order. I mean, you come to a hospital being a patient, your insurance card is read into the hospital information system, and then it is planned which examinations or which treatments you undergo. And very often, the hospital information system is such a generalist that it is unable to really organize the way of a particular department like radiology or ophthalmology. Very often you will find a specialized system, and a general term for that is departmental scheduling system, or DSS. In radiology, it is called a RIS. In intensive care, it is called a PDMS, a patient data management system, with more emphasis on the fact that it handles big data from a lot of sensors. But at the end of the day, from the perspective of the organizational institution-wide view, these systems are subsystems of the hospital information system. And the hospital information system places a clinical order to one or more of these subsystems in order to organize the patient's treatment during the visit in the hospital. Now, the departmental order is then forwarded to the devices. And in which way this is done, this very much depends on the standard that is being used for that. We will come to that a little bit later. But basically, it translates the clinical order into a departmental order, which is more or less a protocol conversion. The typical way to order the exam from the HIS to the DSS is an HL7 message. The typical way of having it transferred to the acquisition device in radiology or in imaging in general is the DICOM modality worklist. So this is kind of a protocol conversion. And then finally, the device will generate some documentation about the patient's examination or the patient's treatment and transfer it to any of the systems above. Whether it is image data, whether it is documents, whether it is numbers, that's actually one of the focuses of what is coming later in this presentation. And of course, it notifies the departmental scheduling system about the status of the order, that it has been completed, for example, or that it has been discontinued. And in turn, the status feedback is forwarded from the DSS back to the hospital information system, which closes the information loop. So now the systems above know, okay, there is documentation, we know how to find it, and we can present it to the user. And that's basically the whole story, which gets a little bit more complicated when we come into the details. A special case, I mean, I mentioned that the communication standard is very much dependent on the domain where it is used, whether it's radiology, whether it's cardiology or so. But very often our customers are asking us if we can have an HL7 interface for the device. And the situation is when you don't have a domain-specific organization program. There is no DSS. A good example for that is surgery, where many people are saying the best scheduling system is the paper on the door of the surgery room. So you do not have an electronic system, but still you have the clinical order and you want to close the feedback loop that I just presented. And for that, very often devices are asked whether they can directly communicate with the systems up there using the HL7 standard. So here we are in the jungle of healthcare communication standards. There are many to choose from, and that's a source of a lot of confusion. People know the buzzwords, and I'm trying to help you finding a way out of that. You will see that there is not always a clear way to move forward, but at least you find a rough direction, I hope. So I'm going to present the standards that I have just presented here with a short profile. And then I will talk a little bit about which factors you could look at in terms of how to choose the right one. Let's start with HL7. I just mentioned that. That is kind of, well, the oldest, the dinosaur among the HL7 standard. The earliest version were already installed in the 70s. And the basic background of that was not so much connecting medical devices. It was dataset synchronization between databases. So it was like, some of you may know how to migrate a database. You are using kind of a CSV format very often. And HL7 was a more precise replacement for that in its early versions. Mainly, it focuses on what I've just told intercommunication between these administrative systems, but actually from its functionality standpoint, it covers almost anything. So there's almost nothing that you cannot do with HL7. It can do everything a little bit, but only a few things really perfect. Mainly it is used for administration, but also for laboratory, including the results and for the subsystem integration that I just presented in the previous slides. It is kind of a jack of all trades, and that's why many people keep falling back on that when no other standards can be applied. It is text and file-based, and we will look into that in much more detail in my second session. It has comparably weak conformance requirements, and that's one of the big challenges when implementing an HL7 interface. So there are different versions. They are not backward compatible, and each of them has a lot of options. And that makes it a little bit difficult to find the right way for implementing that. Yeah, that was the motivation when new devices came up. Furthermore, HL7 is a point-to-point communication standard, so only pre-configured and pre-known communication partners can communicate with each other. And in the world of mobile devices and of cloud development, this standard does not really fit into the tech stack of, let's say, modern applications, especially when it comes to modern devices or web applications. That's why HL7 created a follow-up in the 2010s. So in terms of medical software development, kind of yesterday. It is web-based on the most modern technologies. It is after a REST concept, and the messages are in JSON or XML. Currently, I would say it's being used where point-to-point is just not feasible. So there is no solution with one of the existing standards. We are doing something completely new here. We have a mobile tablet that is accessing the electronic medical record, for example. And Fire is the only way to solve it. However, it is attractive because of its very good technology and its very good documentation, and the near future will probably show further fields of application. It may be put into doubt if the big information systems will organize their internal workflows using Fire. Still, it has weak conformance requirements, so that's a problem that they did not solve when transitioning between classic HL7 and HL7 Fire. But a way out of that is the so-called application profiles. So you have a very generic object which is called observation, and almost anything fits into that. But what do you need for the European Corona Pass? Which fields that are optional in the Fire standard are mandatory for a European Corona Pass or vaccination pass or a digital recipe? This is subject to application profiles that are put on top of the Fire specification. The question is of today, well, it looks very appealing, and HL7 looks very disappealing, but professionals say that it will take a long, long time until Fire will really be used everywhere where HL7 version 2 is currently used. So in-house, I'm a bit in doubt that we will see a big change soon. Coming to DICOM, that's my favorite standard actually, and where I originally came from. It was invented in the 1990s and is coming from radiology. The idea was to get away from film. The DICOM standard is comparably complex. It has more than 10,000 pages in total and consists of more than 20 different books. But yeah, that makes it a little bit difficult to implement it, but it is being rewarded by plug-and-play functionality in the field. At least if you stick to what is usually done with DICOM, it is really you enter 3 parameters, you connect to the remote system, and it just works. A main focus is on imaging and image analysis. So also secondary information based on images can be encoded very nicely in DICOM, and of course the accompanying workflows. Like I mentioned, for example, in radiology, the clinical order is communicated with the DICOM modality work list. It has high training efforts, but yeah, that comes from very, very strict conformance requirements, which are very verbose, of course. Let's come to IHE, which is not really a standard that stands in the row with these others. It stands a little bit on top of them. While DICOM and HL7 are primarily focusing on message exchange and intentionally do not want to specify how applications should behave when this or that message arrives, that caused a big frustration in the 1990s and the early 2000 years, because everyone was claiming to be DICOM and HL7 conforming, but nothing worked because the standards didn't specify system behavior. And IHE came up to fill in that gap. So it's not a new communication standards, it's a guideline how to apply existing standards to achieve certain workflows. And the one that I showed in the beginning with this clinical order that is forwarded and the documentation running back and status feedback running back is actually a so-called integration profile in IHE, which is called scheduled workflow. So super appealing. You can read it, then you know how to implement your interface in detail. Unfortunately, it is domain specific and there is not a technical framework for every domain. For example, I would love to see something for surgery. There is nothing. And another question is, of course, well, that's written on paper and it's actually, I think it should be very appealing to the users. Some users make it a requirement to have IHE conformance for your product, but some do not. And if they don't, then you will not very likely find all systems conforming to these requirements in that healthcare institution. A word on cybersecurity, because that's an important topic these days. All standards do have a means to solve that, and all are based on TLS, the transport layer security, which is basically securing the kind of physical TCP connection, so the low-level packet exchange. HL7 has an easy job. It says it's out of scope. You can use it if you want. Do it yourself. For that reason, I have never seen any secured HL7 interface yet. In FHIR, it's in the underlying technology. I mentioned that FHIR is web-based, so we have the HTTPS protocol, the secure version of HTTP. Everything that you can do with TLS, you can also do with HTTPS. In DICOM, it's an option in association establishment. And in IHE, there is a dedicated technical framework, which is called ITI, IT infrastructure, describing roughly which security measures apply to conform to these requirements. So yeah, now we know them all, but the question is, now you have your specific device doing some kind of examination or treatment, which standard should you go for? And that's kind of a difficult question. But a few dimensions that we should look at is the type of data. So if you are in charge posting or in laboratory, this is the classic HL7 domain. You are kind of safe using only that. And you should be able to interoperate with 95 or more % of the systems out there. Also, a very clear case when it's about big image data like videos or images, then DICOM is the standard of your choice. There are very, very few exceptions to that. You can't do it really terribly wrong when you choose DICOM. ECG is somewhere in between. ECG, there is a great DICOM format and there is a great way of synchronizing ECG curves with images, for example, but it is also often done via HL7 to provide the user kind of a table view or have this comparable over a period of time. When it comes to reporting, you are somewhere in the middle of between HL7 and FHIR. When it comes to sharing entire patient records with other institutions, then you will usually see this being solved with FHIR. And measurements, any kind of measurements is absolutely in the middle. So here it doesn't help this dimension to see what kind of standard to go for. But maybe the infrastructure. For in-house communication, well, FHIR is an emerging standard, but if you want to be safe to implement a standard that you can find everywhere, DICOM and HL7 is what you really find in every hospital. For cross-institution, there are HL7-based profiles, but we are seeing a tendency towards FHIR to do this. When you are in the cloud, yeah, we sometimes see solutions striving for HL7 for good reasons, but actually FHIR is the more appropriate technology to use there. And well, we will see other dimensions that may drive this decision. In-house mobile devices is, again, something completely in the middle between all of them. That's a bit hard to choose. And external mobile devices is FHIR is your only choice because HL7 and DICOM are point-to-point based. The workflow, if you have clinical orders, then I would still say that you are in the world of HL7 and DICOM. So if there is always a user saying this patient should have this treatment, and then this is communicated to the device. If image and video data is involved, you are definitely in the area of DICOM. If you have spontaneous data delivery, HL7 and DICOM do provide solutions for that, but it is not imaging or video, then I would have first a look at FHIR, probably. Yeah, and finally, it's also a strategic decision. So if you want to have something that really works everywhere, you don't have to ask if there is HL7 or DICOM available in the hospital, then you're on the left side. But if you say, well, my device is cutting edge technology and I'm searching for early adapters, the most modern hospitals which are implementing the most modern stuff, then you might get away from the burden to use these old standards from the last century and go for a FHIR implementation. New hospitals with this mindset will more likely have a FHIR interface also for in-house applications. So finally, survival 1-on-1. If your competitors do well, why not look at their solutions? It's sometimes good to question success stories. I've seen so many people talking about FHIR just for talking about FHIR. And if you ask them, what did you really achieve and what is the benefit for the users, you will find out that it is more about FHIR than about something good for the users. Yeah, kind of, well, not so surprising, probably talking to users, especially to IT administrators, is something that will certainly help you because that's their everyday business, connecting medical systems. Yeah, maybe you need to support more than one approach, HL7 and FHIR, HL7 for today's world, but FHIR to be able to install it wherever it's possible in order to not pile up too many legacy for you. And finally, of course, you can ask an expert, for example, us. So I hope I lost no one in the jungle. I'm usually used to a more interactive way of presenting our knowledge. So I hope there is enough time for questions. If you have some, please let me know. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Marcus. I would also like to welcome all of you. My name is Nico, and now that we had an overview of the standards and HL7, I would like to tell you a short story about HL7 and Softgate. So in recent years, we have attended in a number of trade fairs as we come from the field of individual software development. It was never easy to choose a specific topic for our trade fair appearance, as our topics range from embedded software to medical device applications, connectivity, cloud development, and so on. So we thought about what could be the best topic for us, and the topic connectivity with its standards turned out to be the most tangible for us. It is relevant for the most manufacturers. It's easy to define through standardization, and it offers a specific orientation for the audience due to the buzzwords. Historically, the DICOM standard is very close to us, and therefore it was obvious that we should deal with a solution for the DICOM standard first. And yeah, however, it doesn't make any sense to develop an interface individually for each customer. We developed DICOM Connect as a software library, and it enables manufacturers, of course, without deep DICOM knowledge, which would be necessary for an implementation, to integrate the DICOM functionalities. And as our customers have medical devices and applications, we have provided the documentation for the regulatory affairs as a great benefit of the product, as we are 13485 certified ourselves. And so now we had everything in our luggage and went to trade fairs again with a claim, DICOM Connect. DICOM means digital imaging and communication in medicine, and integration into the clinical workflow. So from our point of view, it was pretty clear which devices can be connected with DICOM. At that time, primarily imaging modalities. So what happened was that many people came to us and wanted to connect to the clinical workflow with their devices, but they didn't have imaging modalities. They had devices for blood pressure measurement, patient monitors, ECGs, even dictation systems for doctors. And they wanted to be integrated into the clinical workflow too, and were asking to do this via DICOM. And as we learned before, this might not be the right standard for these devices, so that would be HL7. And we had to put many of these potential customers. And because an individual development would have been too expensive and the topic was not that urgent at that time. So guess what happened? The same interested persons and many more kept coming to our booth year after year and asking for HL7 interface as a product. As you also have already heard from Marcus, the HL7 standard comes with a certain challenge, I would say. And therefore, we hesitated for a long time, actually until middle of 2020, where we started to develop HL7 Connect. And it took some time until July of this year, when the product HL7 Connect with all its benefits was officially released from us. And now, Stasis from our customer, Mac and More, will give you an insight how HL7 Connect works in practice.
Sis Hayab. Very happy to be a part of this workshop. If you're seeing this pre-recorded video, I must apologize. My partner works at a local hospital and they have a lot of staff that has fallen sick, either due to COVID or other similar types of diseases. So she has to jump in and do a 24-hour shift, and I will have to look after the little one this afternoon. So I thought it might be prudent to do a pre-recording rather than have the little one jump around in the back. I'll do what any good parent does for the Q&A sessions. I'll be available for the question and answers, of course, and I will find a good way to bribe her into compliance so that we can answer any questions that you might have. Yeah, so what we'd like to show here is basically, we'll give a quick presentation on who we are and what we do, why we had this requirement all of a sudden to connect to a hospital information system via HL7, the challenges that we faced in doing so, and our experience working with HL7 Connect so far. So our company is called Mag more, and we are based in Munich. We were founded, as a spin-off from the Technical University of Munich, and we develop systems for transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. So what we do here is we have what we call stimulators, which are like pulse generators, and then we take a lot of energy and send them through a magnetic coil. And we can position this coil somewhere on a patient's head and emit magnetic pulses, very strong, very short magnetic pulses. And these magnetic pulses can travel non-invasively through the skin and through the skull and into the outer region of the brain, which we call the cortex. And in this region can influence brain activity. So the clinical idea behind transcranial magnetic stimulation is if you have patients suffering from either underactive cortical areas, we can try to use these TMS pulses to activate these underactive areas, or if patients have overactive areas, we can use these magnetic pulses to try to suppress this overactive activity to get back to a healthy activity level. And the applications right now are for a number of different psychiatric, neurological, clinical indications, but the biggest one is to treat depression. Usually what's done there is you either try to activate the left prefrontal dorsolateral cortex, or you try to inhibit the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So those are the applications for TMS. And TMS is a pretty young field, started developing initially in the 80s, and there's been more and more studies, of course, performed over the years, and at this point is really establishing itself more and more as a clinical method to treat psychiatric and neurologic indications. So we have, as an example here, a system that's used clinically. The system comprises of multiple parts. You have the stimulator, which is able to generate really, really strong magnetic pulses. So it's able to store kilovolt voltages and emit several amperes within microseconds through what we call a magnetic stimulation coil. And this stimulation coil we can then position at different target spots on the head and very focally aim for spots that we want to go for. And then we can emit magnetic pulses. The way that we emit these magnetic pulses is controlled through our application software. We can control how strong the magnetic pulses are, how many pulses we emit. So you can emit 1 pulse per second or 100 pulses per second. There's a very, very big parameter space here. And depending on how we do this, we will either get the desired result of activating brain activity or suppressing brain activity. So we have this application software, we call it the StimWare. And this really covers everything that you need to have in order to do TMS. So you can set up patient profiles, you can assign what we call protocols. So these are like there could be a depression protocol, or there could be an OCD protocol, or a stroke rehabilitation protocol. You can generate reports with an overview on what's happened. So this really has a really good wizard to take you through everything that you need to do for all of your TMS treatments. The problem that we have with this system is that it's more or less a standalone system. So if you want to take information from this system and put it somewhere else, you'd have to take, for instance, a USB stick and plug it in to download reports, and then you could put those somewhere else. Similarly, if you wanted to input this information, you would also either have to work with something like a USB stick or manually input information, of course, say the patient name, other patient information that you might want to use. So this brings us to HL7. And TMS, although it's a pretty young technique that hasn't been used for a very long period of time, if you compare it to alternative pharmaceutical treatment, for instance, is a technique that really is establishing itself more and more. And as such, we have been getting more and more requests to establish a connection to hospital information systems via HL7. This makes sense, of course. So if this is going to be a device that you're only going to be using every now and then, there's no real point to go through all the effort to set up this connection. But if you're going to be using it often on a daily basis on numerous patients, it's a lot more efficient to have a connection and to only have to input information once, patient information, and all the scheduling and everything that comes with it. So we had a first customer that basically requested this from us, and it's a very, very large hospital that's also based in Munich, which is convenient, of course, for us to have that close connection to our headquarters for this initial implementation. And yeah, so we were kind of like, awesome, let's go for it. We would love to do this. But the reality is, so we have our software. It's programmed in Windows Presentation Foundation, WPF. It has a local SQLite database with all the information stored. And okay, so how are we going to connect this to a hospital information system? How are we going to work with the HL7 interface? We obviously have a lot of experiences working with medical devices and software as a medical device, but we didn't have anybody in our team that had previously worked with HL7. So initially we thought, hey, we'll do it ourselves, and we started looking into that, and pretty quickly stumbled upon a number of issues, particularly just, yeah, I mean, this is going to be a big topic today, but just the variety of implementation ways that HL7 presents. So pretty quickly we backtracked and decided, okay, probably rather than do this ourselves and implement something that is also probably not going to be easily customizable for future implementations, let's see if we can identify a partner that can help us with this. So we started looking around, and yeah, luckily we were able to identify or to find HL7 Connect, and this of course made things a lot easier. So we had this HL.
So I'm very sorry that we missed, or that we had to end this presentation at this point, but we were hoping that the video and audio quality would get a little bit better over the time, but in fact it didn't. It's our first experience with the LinkedIn Live event with this setup, and unfortunately Stasis couldn't make it for this meeting, so we had to stop that. I'm asking for your understanding. I will pick up at this point. Unfortunately, just wanted to praise our good collaboration and our good support. But yeah, let's look into the matter. He was talking about HL7. The situation that he described for them was very, very typical. They have an awesome device, super innovative, looks super good. The users love it. A big hospital with a strong background in science is one of the early adopters, and we already talked to the users in some, let's say, planning meetings for the interoperability. And I had the impression that the users really like that systems and are convinced of its impact towards the patient's health. So let's talk a little bit about the solution that we offer to them, which is called HL7 Connect. I think that has been mentioned several times already. So let's jump into this matter now. And it's not just a product presentation that I'm presenting here. It's more or less describing the challenges that we faced. Nico indicated that I'm not the biggest fan of HL7 and that we had some time where we tried to avoid building such a product, but the request was so high, the demand, that it would have been silly not to react to that. So it's not just the product presentation. I'm also telling you a little bit about the HL7 standards and some hurdles that we had to overcome. So HL7, I mentioned it is a text-based format, and what you see in front of you is a message, a typical HL7 message. This is actually a clinical order. That's the backbone of the clinical workflow, the start of everything that we talked about in the previous slide. This is a so-called ORU R01 message. Oh, I'm sorry, that's actually a report here. Anyway, a message, an HL7 message is text-based. So this is what you would see in a text editor if you load an HL7 message, nothing special about it. And it is composed in a very simple way. It consists of lines, and each line is called a segment, and a segment starts with 3 letters. And these 3 letters determine the structure of the segment and the meaning of the fields. The 3 letters have a meaning, so MSH here stands for message header, PID, patient identification, NTE for node, and so on and so on. The second thing that we have, the first element that is following the message header segment start is the so-called encoding characters. In theory, it is possible to select how you encode the structure of the HL7 message at some different levels, which is shown here. And the message is composed of fields. The fields is what you find between 2 of these pipe signs. And each field can also be subdivided into so-called components, which are separated by the caret, one of the encoding characters that we see here. What is not shown here in the sample message, because it's also kind of rare, is that some components can again be subdivided in subcomponents, and each of these fields can have so-called repetitions, which you could think of as a list of information. Next slides will show you one application of that. So, well, that doesn't look very complex, does it? The message format is completely text-based, and even binary data is embedded in base64. Even if this name does not tell you anything, read about it on Wikipedia. It's not rocket science. The structure is very simple. I just explained it. 5 encoding characters. That's all you need to know to decompose a message, apparently. I don't show a lot about communication, but believe me, it's no more complex than that. It is file-based either. So you simply copy such a message that we've seen on the previous slide to a network share, and wow, you have sent your first HL7 message. Network shares come with some disadvantages in practice. They are not very stable over the long time. Servers that are providing such shares can be rebooted, and that can cause some trouble. So it's a little bit better to use the socket-based approach, which does not mean a permanently established connection, but opens a new connection for every message being sent. HL7 defines a so-called minimal lower layer protocol, or MLLP, which is based on raw sockets and which has start and end bytes for each message. So all very, very low level technology. We talked about that in the previous session. The standard was started in the early 70s. So that was contemporary technology by that time. And today it seems trivial. So actually, where's the challenge? Why do we need an HL7 product? Well, one of the reasons is the evolution of HL7. The standard has been developed from, well, the late 70s, first really versions that are applied in practice the way that we know it today have been established in the late 80s. And it is still being developed. The HL7 Germany community says that even though FHIR is an emerging standard, they expect the HL7 standard as a standard to be maintained for the next 20 years, which means that it is probably going to be used before I go for retirement. Also, what might be surprising for some of you is that the version 2.3.1, which is from the past century, is still very, very popular. I think I can, well, more or less just do an educated guess, but in my perception, I would say there is a low motivation for a hospital information system to migrate with every new version of the standard being released, to update the interface, because that is going to cause trouble with the systems that you already have established communication with. So very many of these systems have been started with their development in the 90s and have received their first HL7 implementation by the change between the past century and the current century. And from then on, the systems are sticking with their success story with the HL7 standard that was contemporary by that time. So believe it or not, you will still find that the majority of hospital information systems in Germany are speaking HL7 2.3.1 or 2.4. So that wouldn't be so bad, but let's look into some of the challenges here. So this is now, again, this is really a clinical order message, and this is the description of the message structure as it is described in the HL7 standard. We don't want to look into that into detail. I'm not sure if you can even read these segments, but a thing that I would like to point out here is this part of the standard. So this message definition describes which segments are to be present, which is the correct order of the segments in the message, which segments can be repeated, and how segments are subordinated to superior segments. Here you find a passage which can be quite confusing. These angular brackets are actually telling either of these segments can come at this position. So this ORC segment here can either be followed by OBR or by RQD or. Of course, each of these segments here has a slightly different structure, and that means that even if you have a precisely described message, which is the ORM 001, the clinical order, you do not exactly know how the message structure is going to look like in particular, unless you have read the entire message. That's not so nice if you want to call it a standard, but it is like it is. The reason for this is that these different segments are covering different fields of application. So a general order may look slightly different from a laboratory order or from an order for eye care, and so on and so on. Okay, that's a little bit of complexity what we can handle that. But then what did they do with HL7 version 2.7? And please remember, this message is kind of the backbone and the starting point of every clinical workflow. In HL7, this is original text from version 2.7. The ORM message was retained for backward compatibility, and it is withdrawn with version 2.7. So all this message structure that has been used for more than a decade is now discontinued, and these segments here were now split into particular messages. So instead of having one message and optional segments, we have different messages, but these segments now are precise. Yeah, OMG was my first thought when I read this passage. And on a second glance, now let's have a look. We are seeing now the same message in version 2.7, and it doesn't even fit on a screen page. So the complexity has also grown tremendously. At the end of the day, if you are a device manufacturer, what do you want to know? You want to know the patient ID. Maybe you want to know the visit ID. You want to know by which date and which time you have to conduct which kind of treatment, what was requested, maybe a little bit by whom, but you do not need everything that is buried in all these segments here. So this the interesting information that you really need to know is buried under a big pile of garbage, which is actually not really interesting for you. Well, looking a little bit more into the details, and that's the last slides about mourning about HL7 and what they did do wrong. They did this for a reason. I'm not criticizing the guys who wrote the standard. Like I said, it is supposed to cover everything. And of course, they needed to adapt to 25 years of progress in medical technology. That's definitely a challenge. But anyway, that's the situation that we have to face. And here, for example, also from HL7 version 2.7, that was a version with kind of a lot of disruptive changes. Usually, up to version 2.7, you were safe to find the patient ID in PID2. Patient ID is certainly also a very, very vital information. Yeah, same passage withdrawn, and it is now recommended to use PID3, the patient identifier list, for all patient identifiers. So not only that you cannot obtain the patient ID from the field where you could obtain it for the first 20 years of the HL7 standard, it is also that you now have a list of ideas instead of a single number. And the interesting question, of course, is if you want to have an application that, for example, scans the patient identification from a wristband, which of the IDs in that list should that match? Similar story for the order placer number. That's also, I'm not talking about unimportant stuff here. The order placer number is what the unique number that the clinical order carries to the device, and the device is expected to assign the documentation, of course, to that clinical order. So the documentation is a response to that order, and this order number closes the link so that the EMR can find and call this documentation, whether it is stored in the PACS or the document archive or in a data sink in the EMR itself. It is here said that it comes in two different, well, there is a placer order number and it is unique, but you will either find it in ORC2 in the common order or in OBR2, that's the order detail. And actually there is a one-to-many relationship between the ORC and the OR2. If both fields have a value, then that it must be equal. That's a minimum requirement that the HL7 standard places. So it comes in two different flavors, and you have to be, it is HL7 conformant to do either this or that or both. And that means you cannot rely on a single field where to obtain this important information from. A totally different field that has been there since the beginning. More than one character set can be used in a message. Now, what is that? I'm speaking Latin 1 here in Germany. Yeah, but there are other countries in the world where there is a mix of ASCII characters and special character sets like the Japanese or the Chinese character set, and they need to be mixed up. And that means that a message can be encoded in either in Unicode, that is feasible, but HL7 also allows to switch between the character sets by using special character sets in the message. And that's actually a bit of a nightmare for a software developer. That you have to read everything from the start to the end and look for special characters, and these switch the kind of interpretation that you need to apply before presenting the contents to the user or using them in the database. So where did this lead to us to in terms of product management? Well, one thing is just tremendous waste of resources. If we would read every version of the HL7 standard and implement everything that is written in there, well, then we wouldn't have a released software today. It also doesn't make sense because, of course, there are many misconceptions as well. Not everyone is implementing HL7 entirely right, and you have to, if your communication partner is the leading EMR in that country, then your chances are low, even you find the mistake is in their system, that they will change it. So adapting to misconceptions is also something that you will find in the field very frequently, which means we want to make the whole message format configurable, and how this works is going to be presented later on. Yeah, with all these degrees of freedom, what does the device manufacturer want to do? He wants to read the patient ID, no matter where it is obtained from. So you don't want to say, I want to access that field in that segment. You want to say, I want to access the patient ID. And depending on how the message format looks like in this particular hospital and in this particular HL7 version, the software that fetches the ID from the message for you should do the right thing. That's what you want. And that was a requirement. We just talked about the character encoding, and that's, of course, very, very cumbersome if the device manufacturer would have to consider that. And for that, HL7 Connect draws a border between the HL7 message and the communication towards the device application. That means the API strictly uses Unicode. On Windows UTF-16, on Linux UTF-32. So you only have one character set that you probably are using for your device development anyway, at least if you are targeting international markets. Transparently, behind the scenes, we are transforming all these character set oddities back and forth between the Unicode and the message character set that is actually spoken on that side. You cannot choose that. You cannot necessarily expect that Unicode is available everywhere. Like I said, it is for historical reasons. Yeah, handle message exchange. I outlined that it is pretty simple to actually send messages back and forth, but there is a little bit of complication in the so-called acknowledgement protocol. I don't want to get into too much detail regarding this, but there is a big table in HL7 Connect, depending on the version of the HL7 standard, the situation, what did the sending system request for, did your application signal to us that you understood the message, and depending on all that, we will send an appropriate acknowledgement message back telling whether or not the received message was successfully processed. Nico has mentioned that we have collected many requests from different device manufacturers, and we found that quite a lot of them are in really critical environments like patient monitors, surgery rooms, intensive care. So from the beginning on, we knew that safety class C requirements will sooner or later be on the table. And if they come too late on the table, then the effort to apply them retroactively is quite high. So we said that we want to develop it as safety class C, the highest safety class, right from the beginning, which also led us to the wish to not introduce third-party software into our product, because especially with FDA, this can be, well, a little bit cumbersome. So let's keep this short. This is how the communication actually works. You will receive a message. actually HL7 Connect will receive it, which is integrated in your device. We can do this because we are safety class C, so there is no need to segregate. The message is received by one of our receivers. It is then forwarded to the application-specific processing. How this looks is going to be on the next slide. The application is going to tell us whether it was able to entirely process that message, and our acknowledgement logic will decide whether to not or not to send an acknowledgement and how to compose that message. Yeah, reading messages. That's probably the most one of the most challenging parts, apart from writing, which is very, very similar. So here we have again a clinical order message, and the message header carries well, some relevant information that we are using to select the right configuration. Because even if everything is configurable, you have to make a very, very small assumption. And this assumption is that if it's the same system that is sending the same type of message, we assume that the message structure is identical to within all these messages of this type sent by that system. So far, it has turned out to be a reasonable assumption, and I don't know why it shouldn't be. So this determines the semantics of the fields in the message. And with this, we go into a lookup table. And on the left side of this table, you will see the terms used by your device application. And you have total degrees of freedom to define these terms. They have to fit into an ini file, so it should be one word. You can use underscores, but apart from that, you are absolutely free to say what is interesting for you at all and how you want to name it in your device application. So that is always fixed. And there is a limited number of fields that are really of your interest, because that depends on the workflow of your device. On the right side, you then have the mapping to a so-called, what we call an address in the message. And that's basically listing which segment and where within this segment to access the value for this attribute. Yeah, and with that, we obtain the value. Then we transform it to Unicode and hand it over to your application. And that's almost all. I don't want to be too verbose on that. I could probably talk half a day or more about that, because we spent a lot of effort in that. As we see here, the message structure, if you read the message, appears to be totally plain. Just a list of segments, but the structure definition in the HL7 standard tells us that there is a hierarchy. Yeah, it is not explicitly encoded in the message, and there is no way to read this structure from the message, but it exists in the message definition in the standard. And like we see here, this is actually the order body. This is where the message defines how the patient should be treated, and these curly brackets are telling that there may be many orders in one message. So what you want to do is to say, I want to have the second order, I want to have the third order, I want to have the fourth order, and I want to know the date of that order, or the note, or the kind of treatment that was requested. For that, we need to, of course, to fit an HL7 message structure into the configuration and consider that message structure when accessing the message contents. And that's being done with this style of addressing. So you can just concatenate different segment names with sequential numbers. So this would be the second ORC segment in this message. And from this segment, we descend to the OBR segment. And from that, we descend to the node segment. The algorithm behind that is comparably complex, and I don't want to discuss in too much detail how this works, though it is not a company secret, but it is just too long to explain it here. A takeaway from that, this is how HL7 defines the message structure in the standard, and you can just copy and paste that, and you have a message structure definition. So you can either take this from an interface specification of the system you are communicating with, or from the HL7 standard if the system perfectly conforms to that. Copy it to a text file, and here is your message definition, which allows you to use this hierarchical addressing style. Writing messages, and you won't be surprised that it is very, very similar to reading, but there is one indirection before, because what you do not want to do is to compose the whole message from scratch, the whole structure with all the fields and all the static content. You don't want to explicitly say for every message, this is a production message and not a text message. So there is a lot of static content that is just prescribed by the way that it just is in this version and with this system that you want to communicate with. And of course, you want to have a kind of a pre-configuration for that. So you give this message type a name, for example, care report, put it into the configuration, and HL7 Connect will then resolve it to a so-called message template. And that's not a very special rocket science. The message template is just an HL7 file that resides in the file system. This file is loaded when you invoke the template. It can be pre-configured with structure and with static content. I would not do it this way to have patient ID, for example, or the patient name as part of the configuration, because that's something that you would certainly want to replace. That's just for illustration here. Reading and writing into the template is exactly like it is done and explained on the reading slide that I presented a few minutes ago. So that's exactly the same syntax and the same mechanisms. I won't explain it again. I don't want to bore you. So that's basically everything about how the library works technically. Just summarizing the benefits. So you don't have to care about the message transfer. It is entirely handled by HL7 Connect. Whenever something happens on the network layer, you will be actively informed by an event-based approach. The acknowledgement modes are transparently handled. You can just tell us, I did understand the message or I didn't. Maybe give us a little bit of error message. We will handle all the rest. The message access is limited to reading and writing only information that is really relevant for your device in that particular clinical workflow. You have fixed attribute names in the device application, so you don't have to change the software of your device to adapt to a different HL7 version or a different dialect, as we call it. And you have a flexible mapping of these attribute names to different messages and different message structures. Message creation, we just saw only the variable parts need to be coded in your device. The rest can be loaded from a template. Yeah, what else? I mean, we are talking about device development. I mentioned that the software is classified as safety class C, so I should take a little take on quality management. Because HL7 Connect is not a medical product, it is, according to our quality management system, a software component that has been developed for the purpose of being integrated into a medical product. Our auditors needed some time to understand that, but at the end of the day, we were really completely on the same page, and they said, okay, that's probably the best way to move forward with that. And we are offering two approaches, and to say it in advance, the simple black box approach currently has a market share of 100%. We are a certified company. HL7 Connect has been audited in terms of the development process. Again, not a product audit, but a process audit. So basically, the black box approach means you will have our certificate in your supplier record for Softgate. That means we can deliver certified software components to you or certified software in general. And we deliver with a product documentation, a document that we called IEC 62301 evaluation record. This record explains in detail, it looks a little bit like the audit report from your auditor. So you have all the chapters from the norms on the one side, and on the other side, you have the answers, the process requirements, and the documents that are created in reply and in response to these regulatory requirements. And that's basically it. You don't have to know the results of our last unit tests or to the tracing between requirements and integration tests, because our process is audited like yours. If that is not sufficient, you can choose the gray box approach. And of course, we start off with high-level requirements, like everyone has to do that. So you may have HL7 connectivity requirements for your device that you would then trace to the requirements in HL7 Connect. And from then on, by our development process, everything is traced down through functional requirements, architecture, design, unit test, integration test, and all that stuff. That means you would have to have copies of our HL7 Connect documentation as part of your device documentation. And yeah, that also means that you would have to update your documentation of HL7 Connect each time we are shipping a new software to you, which is one of the major arguments why most of the customers, all of the customers to be precise, are currently choosing the black box approach. Regardless of whether you are choosing the one or the other, HL7 Connect ships with a so-called integration guide. And in this integration guide, there is one chapter that is very relevant for risk management, and that is called Instructions for Safe Integration. And this is the thinking behind it. And that's some of the things that we are regularly discussing with each auditor when we have a new one. We have a hazard analysis for our library, and you have a risk analysis for the product. So the difference between risk and hazard is that, of course, HL7 Connect does not know anything about its context, and the severity is inaccessible for us. We have to assume that everything can be a disaster with safety class C, and that's how we develop the software. But what is really applicable to your system highly depends on what kind of system you are building. Nevertheless, we have identified potential causes for these hazards, and we have taken countermeasures. Also, not only in documentation describing, dear customer, take care of that, but for every hazard, we also have a functional requirement that mitigates this hazard. So basically, you will transfer the applicable hazards of our library into your product documentation. You will look at our measures and assess the remaining risk, and hopefully end up on the acceptable level. Yeah, unfortunately, Stasis was not able to explain that live, but if you would have listened to his presentation to the end, he would have told you that every HL7 project needs an integration project in the hospital. And that's about the configuration that I just presented all the time. This doesn't come from heaven. It is hard work to work through that. And nobody is going to take this burden away from you, because it lies in the nature of things. I hope that was understood. So especially for when you do this a first time and you are sitting in front of IT experts from the hospitals and the manufacturer of the hospital information system or the EMR, they are doing these projects as their everyday business, and you are just having your first pilot project. That can be very, very daunting. Nobody would expect that you have to ask the question, where can we find the patient ID? But that's a relevant thing. So you have to ask the right questions to the right people. You have to prepare the configuration for that, of course. But also a very crucial point is that you test and refine. There are events that may occur in the systems above you, and it is very, very important to figure out whether they are relevant or they are not. For example, two cases of two different patients being merged to one case. So far, we have seen that in actually in all of our projects, you could ignore these kinds of messages, and that's good, of course, but you should have evidence from a field test or from a acceptance test for this customer to really prove that this is true, not only in theory but also in practice. Yeah, and that's what we are here for. So we would support you. We would support you forever if you like, but most of the companies just want to have someone to help them in learning how to do these things. So there is a smooth transition. We are on your side as long as you need us. And when you decide you want to go alone, you feel comfortable of just doing this stuff on your own, we will just let you go. Why not? So thank you very much for your attention. And well, I hope there are some questions.
Okay, thank you, Markus and Nico, and yeah, of course to Stasis for sending us the video, where we had some problems with. So I want to apologize again for this. But on the other hand, we have Stasis here in the meeting now, and if there are any questions, there is a chat where you can place your questions and we will try to answer them. So one question that came up during the session was if the slides will be shared at the end of the session. So the recording of the session will be available in our feed on LinkedIn after the session. After about 1 week, we will have it on our homepage too. And if you want to receive explicit slides or something like that, please write just a mail to us or use the survey page in order to address this to us. Then we can send you some information and slides that you require. Okay, so here is the next question. What are the differences between the library HL7 Connect and a typical middleware like NextGen, Mirth Connect, Rhapsody, Ensemble, or Cloverleaf? Don't they have the same purpose? I think that's something Markus can tell you a little bit about.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that question, Alfonso. Yeah, well, basically, they really share a lot of functionality. Also, the products that you mentioned are kind of transformers of from one format to another. So, for example, with a communication server like NextGen or Cloverleaf, you could transform the messages into always the same HL7 format. These softwares are usually used within the hospital and not part of the medical device. That's one of the major differences. None of the projects the products that you are mentioning here has the certification to be really part of the medical device. Also, they need they also need a configuration, but that's in the hands of the engineers that are administering that system, and they are comparably expensive. Unless for Mirth Connect, I've seen this done by the hospital IT. If you want to have Cloverleaf administered, you always need a Cloverleaf consultant. Yeah, I think that's basically the main difference. These products are really, really huge, and I think it's going to be very, very hard to use them with all their underlying technology in a medical device that may even have an ARM board. But at the end of the day, you could achieve similar things with that. Just that HL7 Connect is regarding its technology and its certification closer to the medical device. Other questions?
So sorry also from my side, we've had some family issues, but please feel free if there's anybody interested to share the recording of the video that I had made with anybody that's interested. feel free to share that, of course.
Yeah, thank you. So we wait for any more questions. So we have a delay of some 30 seconds, I think, between what we talk and what you see on LinkedIn on the live event. So, but we wait if some more questions will come up. As I told you, if there are any questions, you may reach us easily by LinkedIn, by mail, by telephone. You may use the survey page or visit us on a fair. So there is an additional question. If HL7 would work regardless of the technology or programming language that is used?
Well, HL7 itself, of course, the HL7 standard does not prescribe any programming language or technology, except for the very low-level text-based TCP communication that you can implement in any programming language. In case that the question refers to HL7 Connect, our product, it is developed in C++. Because we know from our experience with our DICOM product that C++ is still the most frequently used technology in device development. Funnily, our first two early adapters were both not C++ based. Stasis was telling that they are using .NET and WPF, and we found together a very convenient way to maintain the object-oriented interface of HL7 Connect into their programming language. So they just wrote a very, very small wrapper in .NET. Stasis can probably tell a little bit more about that. We didn't have any effort on our end to make this work. Our other early adapter was using LabVIEW. Just a second, please, Stasis. And in LabVIEW, it was actually LabVIEW does not know anything about object orientation. So that was really, really a hard challenge. And what we did for this customer was that we developed a so-called wrapping layer. And this breaks down the object-oriented API to a plain C API, which is a DLL of functions. And well, I cannot say that this works in any programming language, but I know it works in LabVIEW, it works in Java, it works in Python, it works in, well, all programming languages I actually know. So any programming language that can load a Windows DLL and use functions from that DLL would be able to use HL7 Connect through the wrapping layer as well. I have to admit, I don't like this approach very much because it removes type safety and everything that is so good about using C++ over C. But if that's the only way to go, that's a feasible way of integrating it. Stasis, sorry for the interruption.
No worries. So that was probably, so that was historically our software was developed with in Windows Presentation Foundation and .NET with C# as the backend code. So we ended up also wrapping HL7 Connect into C#, and that was probably for us technically the most challenging thing, because working with HL7 is really straightforward. With HL7 Connect is really straightforward, and getting that initial wrapping working. But we did that basically also just using standard methods to copy or to wrap C++ libraries into C#. So I don't think we did anything too fancy there, just basically copying established methods. But yeah, so that was programming wise probably the biggest thing that we had to do. And then it was more about, actually for us, as we were new to the whole thing, it was more about what do we have to change in our existing software so that it can fit into the workflow that would be required from the hospital. in terms of how they do scheduling and these types of things. So that was the other big work block, and HL7 Connect interfaces pretty easily. So that was really, especially of course with the help from the team, that was really pretty straightforward.
So if there are any more questions, please go on. Thanks, Stasis, for your comments.
I'm sorry again. It's been such a tricky day.
That's life
nowadays. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, we will wait for a minute, and if there are no more questions, there is one more question from Andreas.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, there is no requirement written in the HL7 standard itself. I have done, as part of a consulting job, I have had a survey among German hospitals in terms of which physical technology they are using for connecting medical devices or medical systems in general. And I found out, for example, that military hospitals in Germany disallow anything but Ethernet. So no USB, no Bluetooth, no Wi-Fi, no wireless connections in there. For network stability, I would recommend to always go for a wired connection via Ethernet, but it is not forbidden to use Wi-Fi, and it certainly depends on the type of device. If it's a device which is focused on mobile, the customers will understand that you need Wi-Fi to do HL7 communication as well. So I do not have an answer. The one answer that fits for all, that's very much dependent on the type of device and the type of hospital that you want to install it. Sorry for being a bit imprecise, but that's the truth. Very good questions, by the way, and I'd really like to hear more of them.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So it seems there are no more questions. So finally, we want to say thank you for your interest and participation in the event. It was the first time for us to do such an event. However, it won't be the last one. So it was a pleasure for us to see how big the interest in our products is, and even in the cooperation with our customers like Mac and More. And yeah, so we are already planning the next event, and let's see what will be the next connectivity edition we can do. Okay, so yeah, I wish you a nice evening, and yeah, maybe we see us in the next event. And if there will come up any questions or anything like that, you will really find us on the internet or where you want to find us. So thank you very much and bye-bye.